All right. This webinar is the fiscal year 2019 reporting and evaluation webinar. If you're joining us, then you are probably a project coordinator or a financial reporting contact or a programmatic reporting contact or some combination of all three. My name is Travis Hearn. I am the grant program manager at the Office of Community Food Systems. I'm joined today by Carla Garcia, the grants officer for training and planning grants. Carla, could you say hello?
Yes, hello. Thank you so much, Travis. Yes, so I am Carla. I have been working with a lot of you preliminary pre-awards, so looking forward to kind of just covering some financial information today. Thank you.
And we're glad to have you, Carla. I'm really glad you were able to join us. And also on the line, but not listed here, is another of my teammates here at the national office, Robert Eck. He will be mostly working in the background as more or less a producer of this webinar, and he'll be able to flag questions for us and make sure that everyone has any concerns addressed, and also to help if we have any technical difficulties. So Robert, could you also say hello?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm looking forward to working with you, and if you have any questions or concerns with your audio or your visual, please feel free to text me directly.
All right, thank you, Robert, and thank you, Carla. And with introductions out of the way, I'm going to begin our presentation with beginning with this agenda. First, we'll cover a little bit of background about why the reporting and evaluation is important, kind of how it works with USDA and with your grant program. We'll provide a very brief overview of kind of what evaluation is and make sure we're working with common definitions. And then I'll also point you towards some resources. And then we'll really get into the meat of this presentation and the main focus, which is the actual reporting that you will do as grantees that's important for the Office of Community Food Systems, in terms of program reporting, and then for Carla's office, the financial management side of the house with USDA financial reporting. And then at the end of this presentation, we will have time for some Q&A. And I've been given some instructions by Robert to help facilitate Q&A, and I'll take us on to some housekeeping items to make sure that that information is covered here. But if you have a question or comment, use the chat function. And we've asked that if you have a if you have a question to post in the chat, that you post it with a hashtag Q at the beginning. In the past, our webinar platform has let us flag questions, but this time we don't have that same functionality. So with as many people participating as we currently have on this webinar, it's important to make sure that we're able to see the questions when they're asked and that we can address them at the end of the presentation. And you can ask a question at any time. Remember to start it with hashtag Q, but we'll get to all questions at the end of the presentation. And then I also want to remind everyone that audio is through the computer for this call. If you called in, you should be able to hear us as well. There was a call-in option for this meeting, but I want to emphasize that if you're on the phone and not on the computer, we are showing a PowerPoint presentation. So it's important that you have your computer in front of you so you can see the materials that we're projecting for everyone. And then just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded. I did press record at the beginning when I announced it, and want to emphasize that if you if you lose your connection or if you have any kind of technical difficulty that keeps you from making it all the way through with us, that's not a huge deal. We are going to post this recording of the webinar for everyone to access. And while it may take a little bit of time to process through USDA, we expect to have it online before the grantee gathering and have it available for you. And we'll send out an email with a link to that presentation, to the recording of this presentation, once it's available. And you can look for a PDF of these slides and an email follow-up that I will send either later this afternoon or early tomorrow on Friday. Okay, a little bit of background about why we're so concerned with evaluation. In the Richard B. Russell National School Lunch Act, which is the legislation that created the Farm to School program, the program was directed to cooperate in an evaluation by the secretary of the program carried out using grant funds. So this is not just something that's nice to do, it's also something that is in the legislation that guides our program. And when we're talking about evaluation, these are some of the terms you may see. And I don't want to give anything away just yet, but there may be a pop quiz later in the presentation. If you were familiar with our onboarding webinar we did in August, then you may already have expected that. But we will not be grading anybody, but we'll be checking to see whether everyone's able to pay attention. So we'll be using some of these common terms early in this presentation. Regarding evaluation broadly, it's a structured process of assessing the success of a project and meeting its goals and to reflect on the lessons learned. So between your beginning and then maybe at different points in between or at the end of the project, you're checking, did it accomplish what we intended it to accomplish? Or if it's after the end of the project, what did we learn over the course of these activities? A process evaluation refers specifically to the conduct of the project. Is the program being executed according to plan? Is everything going along the way that it's supposed to? And the example we've provided is a check-in at the midway point through the project. So if your goal was to conduct 5 taste tests halfway through the project, you'll want to, in June in this example, you'll want to see how many taste tests were conducted, and if you've done 5, if you've done fewer than 5, if you've done more than 5, that gives an indication of how you're progressing towards your final objective. And then an outcome evaluation is looking at what is the program producing? Is it achieving the desired results? It's not just is everything going according to plan procedurally, but are we getting the things out of our program that we had hoped or planned to? And then the example here is that students are consuming more local fruits and vegetables, and more of the school budget is used to procure local foods. And this slide includes an illustration of why evaluation is important. The data from evaluations can help you tell your story and create opportunities for funding, help track your progress and show accountability, and help influence policy. And this graph is an example that was created using dollars spent on local foods by U.S. schools from school year 2011-2012 through school year 2013 and 2014. And you can see that, you can immediately see that there was an increase and actually a apparently substantial increase. It's easy to immediately visualize exactly how much the amount of money spent on local foods by U.S. schools grew between those school years. And you can I can imagine how this would be used to tell a story about the success of a program, or show clearly tracking progress, showing that at one point this dollar amount was spent, and then at the next point this dollar amount was spent, and could help influence policy if someone is asking for evidence of a program that works. This is the type of information that may make a stronger case. Okay, evaluation terms and resources. We've talked a little bit about the terms, but I'll also point the viewers towards some resources here. We've seen process and outcome evaluations. Here are some terms that refer specifically to pieces of evaluation plans, beginning with the goal, the kind of overarching desired achievement, a specified accomplishment to be achieved at some point in the future, typically aspirational and far-reaching. And then there's 2 examples. One is a goal that an athlete might set just as a general example, and the other is a farm-to-school specific example. And then we're going to look at 2 of the other terms on this graph in the next slide. Objectives, which are achievable milestones or targets. So it may be something that you can measure. It may be a timeline. It may be timeline related. And then those also work in tandem with outcomes, which describe the changes in conditions that you're expecting when you reach your goal. And we referred to outcomes earlier when we talked about an outcome evaluation. And I've included on this slide a couple of resources that may be of interest to farm-to-school grantees when they're working on evaluation plans. On the left is the Farm-to-School Planning Toolkit, which is a resource that is available on the Community Food Systems website. And on the right is a screenshot of the Farm-to-School Resources page, which is different from the Resources for Current Grantees page that we've referred grantees to before. On the Office of Community Food Systems webpage, there is also a general farm-to-school resources page, and there's an evaluation section of that page, which is captured here. And both of those links at the bottom should be live in the slideshow that will be sent out afterwards in PDF form. So if you're looking for those, specific resources, then keep an eye on the follow-up email, and you should be able to click those links and be guided directly to them. And I also want to share another excellent resource, the Grantee Gathering. If you are an implementation or planning grantee, we're very much looking forward to seeing you in New Orleans next week. It's arrived extremely quickly, and we're very excited to meet all of the implementation and planning grantees involved in this project. We will see you in New Orleans Thursday and Friday of next week, September 19th and 20th. And while we're there, we'll go back over some of the content from this presentation, but we'll also be talking about some of this information from different angles. And then you'll also have an opportunity to network with each other, to connect, to maybe ask questions of other grantees or ask questions of the USDA team members who are there about evaluation, about reporting, and to hopefully gain additional insight into this entire process. All right, here is the first of our pop quizzes. And Robert, this is where I expect to need your help. But question 1 is, which of the following describes an outcome evaluation? All right, and Robert is going to open a poll. So in the past, we've used the chat box to answer, but here we're going to open up a poll for participants so that you can enter a specific answer, and then we'll be able to see what everyone thinks without crowding the chat box. So Robert, is there a way to open the poll and keep the also keep the presentation open?
I don't believe so, but the poll is open now.
Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen again and see if everyone's still able to answer the poll, because the answer options are on the presentation. The poll has to be closed before we start sharing.
All right. Then I will close the poll, and then you can walk through the answers.
Okay, we'll do that. Okay, polling has ended, so I'm going to open back up.
Yep.
It still says the poll is open, Robert.
All right, closing. All right, I closed the poll. And you should be able to take over again, Travis.
Okay, got it. All right, apologies for the technical difficulties. We're still getting used to this new system, but thank you all for your patience. So hopefully some of you were able to get a glimpse of this question at the beginning, but here it is again. Which of the following describes an outcome evaluation? And I hinted earlier at process and outcome evaluations, which that could be the subject of a pop quiz. So that has come to pass here. Is it A, determining if a program is being executed as planned, intended? B, determine if the program resulted in desired behavior, attitude, knowledge change, and or skills development? Is it both A and B, or is it none of the above? And then I really would like everyone to have a chance to weigh in. So I'll give about 3 seconds for everyone to enter their message in enter their option in the chat. You can just put A, B, C, or D, and that way hopefully we won't be inundated with responses, but we'll still get a snapshot of what people are thinking. So I'll change the slide in 3, 2, 1. And the answer is B. And I'm looking up through the chat and I see a lot of Bs. And if you chose B, you are correct. Determining if the program resulted in desired behavior, attitude, knowledge change, and or skills development is an outcome evaluation. The first choice, A, was a process evaluation. So good job. We know that you were paying attention in the first part of the presentation, and thank you all for participating. I hope that we can continue to have some audience participation before the Q&A. Okay, USDA program requirements. We're going to start by talking about the program reporting, and then we'll move into financial reporting. The evaluation of your project is based on, your own evaluation of your project is based on your design. It is supposed to serve your stakeholders and also communicate to USDA what you've learned from your project. Did you achieve your desired outcomes? Did your process go according to plan? And in order to facilitate this process, USDA has progress reporting, and this helps us and us in the national office, and in particular the regional leads, monitor and support projects. So if you're having a problem with your project or encountering a challenge, you can always reach out to your regional lead, but in any case, you will have opportunities to report those in your progress reports as well. And then the baseline and final reporting contributes to USDA's evaluation of the entire grant program, which I alluded to earlier with the Richard B. Russell School Lunch Act. And we'll get into a little bit more why these two, the baseline and final reporting, are connected and why they're important. The key components of USDA's reporting structure, the programmatic reporting structure, are the baseline report, which planning and implementation grantees each complete one time at the beginning of their project. The progress report, which every grantee, regardless of track, will complete semi-annually. And the final report, which again, every grantee will complete a final report, but the implementation and planning grantees report will look slightly different from the training grantees. For implementation and planning grantees, the final report mirrors much more closely the baseline report. And here is the information about the upcoming baseline report. And you'll notice in the first bullet that the reporting contact will receive an email with a link no later than October 1st, 2019. I want to flag a couple of things with this bullet. The first is that it is an unfortunate limitation of our system that we're only able to send the reporting invitations to one point of contact. And the invitation on October 1st will be sent to the specific individual that was listed as the progress reporting contact on the sheet that everyone completed mostly in August, where you reported your points of contact. The project coordinator is, I've heard some feedback from project coordinators that they would like to also receive the information about the required reports, but our system can only send the invitation to a single email address. Now, once you do get the link to complete the report, I do believe it is a function of our system that the link can be shared within your organization. So if the reporting contact sees that some information needs to be completed by the project coordinator, those two individuals are able to share the link and collaborate on the report to make sure that it has the fullest and most complete information. But the only person who will receive that reporting invitation is the progress reporting contact. And then those were the two major bullets that I wanted to flag here. And I also want to say that at this time we are going through an email transition So unfortunately, I cannot say with certainty exactly what email address the report will come from, but do keep an eye out October 1st for that reporting invitation email. It will be sent via email, and my expectation is that we will have the transition completely resolved by that time, and it will be clear that this email came from the Farm to School team. So keep that in mind also, and if you're not seeing that email on October 1st, you may want to check your spam folder on your email. Sometimes the emails can be caught up in spam filters, though they do include details that are designed to get around the spam filters. And if you still are not able to find that report and you're the reporting contact, you can reach out to either farm2school@usda.gov or your regional lead, and one of us will be able to connect you to your programmatic report. All that being said, the initial report is due, the baseline report is due October 31st, 2019. There's only one per grant project, and in the time we've been mentioning the baseline report, hopefully it's been in the back of everyone's mind since they first heard their initial communications from us, and has been working on getting the data together in advance. I'll also be including a template of the baseline report that includes the types of questions to expect, so that you know exactly what type of data you'll need to complete the real report when it arrives in October. And that's the same resource that is linked to here under the fourth bullet, an example of baseline report on the reporting and evaluation tools section of the grantee resources page. And as always, if you ever encounter any problems, you can email farm2school@usda.gov. No matter what your issue, we will be able to direct it to the correct person. These are the primary content areas of the baseline report. I'll go through each of them in greater depth, and then again, you'll see this information mirrored when you receive the report, the template of the baseline report. The first is partnerships and networks. This will ask a little bit about who you're working with, what groups are helping, and how much support they're providing. The next section has to do with procurement. The report will request the schools or districts you're working with. And when you receive your final report, I mentioned that the final report for planning and implementation grantees mirrors the baseline report. When you receive your final report, you will be asked to report procurement data for these same schools. So it is important to report that procurement information from schools that you will be able to report that procurement information on your final report as well. And these are some examples of the types of procurement questions that will be asked on that final report. The third section covers food preparation and serving, including training for food service staff and the percentage of scratch cooking. The fourth covers farm to school activities, including questions about what types of activities are currently happening within the scope of your project in your area or your region or locally. You'll be asked to report on local procurement activities, curricular, education type activities, the promotion and communication of farm to school, and any gardening activities, as well as if you have an agricultural plot on any of your campuses, like the numbers of edible school or community gardens or greenhouses. And then finally, there will be questions about the policies that are currently in place supporting farm to school activities. And all of this is described in greater detail on the template that will be included in the follow-up email, which is also available on the Farm to School grantee resources page. The progress report. For planning and implementation grantees, the first progress report will be included with the baseline report. There's no need to look for a second email. So the planning and implementation grantees will receive one report document. It will include the questions of the baseline report, and then it will include questions for the progress report. And it's important to think of these as two different reports, even though they'll be combined in the first one you receive, because you will only receive the baseline report once, and it will only be formatted. The progress report will only be combined with the baseline report once for that reason. In the future, the progress report will always be sent on its own. And for training grantees, the link that you receive will lead directly to a standalone progress report since you are not required to complete a baseline report. And on the grantee resources page, these are posted as separate resources, and the majority of progress reporting will take place independently of the baseline report. The progress reports are due semi-annually. They're due every other quarter. Currently, they're due at the after the ends of even-numbered quarters, quarters 4 and 2. And then we are preparing an FY19 reporting timeline for the grantee resources page as well. So once that is online, you'll be able to check in on that at any point and see if you should have received a report or if you're missing a report. And it also includes the financial reporting timeline, which is different from the program reporting timeline. Each time you receive a progress report, you'll be reporting on activities from the previous 6 months. It's not as rigorous as the baseline report. It's more of a check-in type of report, and you'll be reporting your challenges, successes, any changes in staff, or any anticipated budget changes. This lets USDA get out in front if you're expecting that you'll have to request any type of project revision. It is on USDA's radar. And then we're aware that the fiscal year 19 grantees have not been active for an entire 2 quarters, that everyone's project began at the earliest in July. So you will not have to report for the activities for any activities that took place before your grant actually began. You'll only include the first 3 months of activity during which you had your grant through the end of July, then August, and September. You'll have 30 days to complete each progress report, and you'll receive that invitation the first weekday or first business day after the end of the quarter. So if the quarter ends on Saturday, then you may receive it on the second calendar day of the next quarter. But once the quarter closes, you will receive your report shortly after. And you can see an example of a progress report on the Reporting and Evaluation Tools section of the Grantee Resources page. And I'll also be including the template for both training grantees who have a separate set of questions and implementation and planning grantees on the email that I'll send out to follow up on this webinar. And as always, you can email the Farm to School team at farmtoschool@usda.gov, or you can email your regional lead, and one of us will be able to get you an answer to your question and help you through the reporting process. Okay, final reports. The reporting contact, again, the one person who is listed as the reporting contact, this is still the limitation of the system, will receive an email at the end of the grant with a link to the final report, which is due 90 days after the close of the grant. So please note that the final report is due along a different timeline than the progress reports. And I also want to skip down closer to the end and note that if you're a planning grantee, you will also be required to submit an action plan along the same timeline. The action plan will also be due within 90 days after the close of the grant. So the final report and the action plan for planning grantees are due along the same timeline. It's recommended that you prepare data in advance, much like with the baseline report. And there's an example of the final report under Reporting and Evaluation Tools. Again, recall that the baseline report and the final report mirror each other. And you will need to report procurement data for the same schools on the final report that were reported on the baseline report. Then training grantees have a different set of questions. Training grantees, which are detailed in the next slide, are required to ask certain questions of their trainings, and those specific questions are also available online. And at any time, if you have any questions, you can ask your regional lead or the Farm to School team for support. As I mentioned, training grants have a set of required USDA questions for assessing their trainings. You can find those questions here at this link. And for each training conducted, it's required to provide the number of attendees categorized by job role. And these are the examples of the job role in the sub-bullets here, and you'll be able to see more details about the questions on the link here that will be included with the PDF of the slides, and will also be included with the follow-up after this presentation. The grantee resources page, which I've alluded to multiple times, looks like this. The reporting and evaluations tools is in a table about halfway down the page, and it's circled with a star next to it on this image, and the link to this page is included below the image. USDA also offers some reporting resources on the current grantees page, such as this tracking sheet, which is of which there is a screenshot here, as well as I've mentioned example reports, the action plan templates for planning grantees, and evaluation resources. Additionally, I did mention the reporting timeline. We are planning to get that posted on the grantee resource page as soon as possible. All right, the second pop quiz. The baseline and first progress report are due when? I'll count down from 5 and then change the slide. Put your message in the chat box before then. 5, 4, 3. Robert?
Travis, while we are waiting for people to submit their answers, would you like to save the questions that we have lined up for the end, or would you like to start reviewing some of these now while we wait for responses?
We'll get to all the questions at the end because they may be covered in Carla's segment of the presentation.
Okay.
All right. Baseline and first progress report are due October 31st, 2019. These are due within 30 days for implementation and planning grantees. These are combined into a single report and due October 31st. For training grantees, they are there's only a progress report. It's a standalone report and will be also due October 31st. True, false. At the time of final report submission, all grantees must submit an action plan. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is false. Only planning grantees must submit an action plan with a final report. And as I mentioned, the action plan is due within 90 days, just like the final report is due within 90 days. Okay, and then with all of that having been covered, I'm going to pass the baton to Carla Garcia, who will cover financial reporting.
Thank you, Travis.
Right, Carla, you should have control.
Okay, sure. Let me just check that real quick, and it does appear I do. I think I have to actually click on Take Control. All right. So I am trying to do that, and for some reason it's not allowing me to move
Try
on.
using the left or right arrows.
The right arrows. So I don't know if maybe I can just tell you next, because for some reason it's not working for me.
Okay, we can do that.
Yeah, let's try that. Yeah, I'll continue to try, and if it works at one point. But yeah, I guess we can go ahead and go to the next one. I will be covering and providing an overview of the USDA financial reporting requirements. So on the first screen that we have here, you will see that the reports, the financial reports, are due quarterly. They are going to be due 30 days after the end of each federal quarter. And in order to submit this, you should have already at least initiated the request to get set up in FIPPers. And I do kind of want to provide a brief overview of what that entails. To gain access to FIPPers, you should have already been e-authenticated or initiated that process. And then two, you want to complete the 674 form and turn that in so that you can gain access to the FIPPer system. So you'll see the web URL listed here. Before you can gain access, those were the two things you needed to do. We did send out that information with the award checklist. So if you have any questions about any of the specific processes and where you're at, specifically you can email your grant officer about that specific information. The first financial report, as we just covered it, and looks like you guys are all set, is the October 31st, 2019. You are going to be reporting July 1st through September 30th of 2019. So this is the period that you would be reporting in terms of the financial information. So any financial activity that has occurred, even if you haven't drawn down, we are looking for expenses that you incurred during that time frame. Again, we're here to help you if you have questions about the specific report. And with that said, let me see if I can hover over and move it, but it does not appear to give me that access. So yeah, we'll go ahead and do the next slide. Submitting the financial report. So as you guys can see on this, if you've had access at this point, then this screen might look familiar. If you don't have access to FIPRS, this is what it looks like. The system itself will have basically these different icons on here, and you'll see home page, and frequently asked questions is kind of just highlighted there, so you know that you can go there. When you first log on, you want to click on online forms at the top and then move from there. So we'll go ahead and do the next slide. And this is what you'll see, the highlighted online forms, and then you can see where it says submission. So you would come onto this specific area on the website, and you would want to click on program, your specific program. The federal form is the 425. Obviously, your state, you shouldn't have any other options, but just in case, we're just kind of walking you through it. The operating period for all the grantees, because everyone's awarded during the same time frame, will be 2019. And the quarter for the first report for everyone will be 2019 quarter 4. So the example I know says 18, and we'll try to update that. But yeah, we would need to make sure that you select 2019 in both instances. So just look for 2019 when you hover over that arrow and click on that, and then we have another example coming up. And after you've done all that and you've identified the right operating period, you can click submission at the top, and you'd complete the following fields that are coming up on the next slide. So we'll go ahead and do the next slide. So as you can see, once you've done that, you've selected the quarter, you can come here, and this one's a little bit more specific. This is what you would see once you click on that. You would see all these options for various quarters. Again, I want to emphasize that for your first report, you're looking at hovering over the 2019 quarter 4. I realize that this arrow's on 18, but you want to keep going down and do 2019 quarter 4. That is the first report you'd be submitting. For quarter 1, 2, and 3, just so you know, because we're getting some questions on this, those would be blank reports because we have to enter something in the system. But the first one you would actually report financial information for is the quarter 4. Then you're going to hover over next, and you're going to click next. And we can go to the next slide. Just make sure you select the right one. So submitting a financial report. Here you'll see the second drop down here. After you hit next, you see at the bottom that it says quarterly, and then you can see that there's also something that says new. The drop down menu on the right will change with each report. So for your report that's due at the end of October, you'll select, again, 2019 quarter 4. Two things that will happen if you select the wrong quarter. If you select the quarter that's already passed, it's going to show revision. So what you should be seeing, because that should not happen, you see where it says revision, there's 0 there. This particular one is your brand spanking new first report. That's what you should see. However, if you are revising the existing one, then you would actually see revision and a count of 1. In the example here, you'll see 0. That's what you should see. In this instance, it's a brand new report, so it's going to be new. You're going to click on new, and then you can open your financial report. So if we'll go, just pretend we're clicking on new here, and we can go to next. And this is what, we can go to the next one. Yep, submitting a financial report. So here you go, submitting a financial report. This is what the financial form will look like in FIPRS. And so this is more to just kind of show you an example. We're going to cover the form in depth. This is a very small picture, so we'll kind of zoom in on the next fields. You are required to complete Section A and Section 10, fields D through K, and the fields I through K are going to refer to your specific match information. This grant does have a match requirement, This is where we capture the match information as far as financial stuff is concerned. So this is where we would expect you guys to report where you are to date on the financial aspect of your specific grant. So we can go to the next one, and I think it's going to be a little bit more zoomed in. So you'll start at the top of the form, and on the top of the form you'll see where there's a from and a to date. You want to complete the project grant period. You need to enter your start and end date. A lot of times I notice that folks will enter the quarter. They're specifically looking for your period of performance date, so that would be the start and end date of your grant. So if you're not sure what that is, that would be on your FNS 529, or that would also be on your grant award documents or your letter of credit. So any number of those three forms would have that information, but if you don't know your grant performance period, you can also email your grant officer. Again, that is just basically your start and end date of the project. So you'll enter that, and then you can move on to the rest of the form. We'll hit next slide. All right, so then if you hover on down to the form, you're going to see line D, E, F, G, and H, and this kind of walks you through what to enter in each line. You know, line D is the full amount of your grant award. This amount stays the same with every report because your grant award amount is going to stay the same. Line E is the actual amount you have withdrawn from your ASAP account. So this is a cumulative amount. So for first quarter, it's going to be whatever you've drawn, you've been able to draw down. And then you have F, the amount of funds you've obligated but you've not yet withdrawn from your ASAP account. Again, if you don't have access to ASAP, you can't go in there and draw down, but you can report that you've had the obligation during the quarter. Line G would be basically adding line E and line F, and then line H is the funds remaining in your account that have not been obligated, and we can go ahead and hit next. You want to go ahead and go down to the form, and when you get to the bottom of it, I think this section is basically your match information. So we have section 10. You're going to be reporting on line I, the full amount of your match. That would be what's on the 529. That is the official amount that you all basically stated that you would meet pre-award, and that's what is going to be reported here. This amount stays the same with every report, so that would be line I, because, again, that's not going to change. And then line J is the amount of your match that you've contributed to the grant so far. And when I say so far, I'm referring to the quarter, specific quarter, but it is cumulative. So as you progress through your project, that quarter 4 might not be as much as quarter 2. So just make sure you're tracking that, and every quarter you're keeping track of this cumulatively. Line K is the amount of your match that you have yet to contribute. So basically it's the remaining amount that you've got to meet. And then the next slide, submitting the financial report. We're basically just stating here, do not fill out these particular fields. You want to look at lines, the L through O, and then complete section 11, which is indirect expenses. So don't fill out L through O. This is like program income. We shouldn't be generating that. And then there's some other stuff here that's not applicable to the specific grant. So you basically would just move on to section 11, which is indirect expenses, if it is applicable and if you were approved for those. We can move on to the next slide. So submitting the financial report, as you can see on the top, the specific one, it looks like they have posting rights. You should have validating rights and also certify rights. So in your case, you would hover over to the top, certify first validate the report, and then you would actually certify after. So we'll go on to the next one. So in this particular, we wanted to show you on the slide that this particular submission, they received some sort of error. So you'll see this. If something's going on, you're like, what's going on? My report isn't going through. The system is going to run and generate some sort of engine validation. You need to make sure that you look at this. It looks like this one has 0 errors, 0 warnings, 0 cells. So no errors or warnings were found for this submission. So you can click OK, and then next. We'll move on. If there are errors, though, we'll go back. One, you get a warning, and this one looks a little different from the previous slide because you'll see where it says warning, and there's one. So the system's highlighted the field that requires modification. So fix the error and then click OK. And we can go to the next slide. If there are no issues, you can, like I said, you'll just literally click OK. You'll see where it says OK here. There's a button icon there, and you're going to see a message at the bottom that says the submission has been submitted. In your case, it would either say validate or certified, depending on what step you're on. We'll move on to the next one. And then, of course, we've kind of covered some of this, but just a little bit of an overview. The final financial report will be due 90 days after the close of your grant. As far as FIPPers is concerned, you will need to go in there and select the final report and submit it. You have 90 days as opposed to the 30 days. So the final is the only time frame that you've got that additional period so you can go through your invoices and bills. And it gives you a little bit more cushion to make sure that you've had enough time to reconcile all your bills and then submit the final report. Again, you must log into FIPPers to submit the final financial report. Everything is done online. That is how we collect the financial information. The final report is the same as far as the financial information is concerned. There are special instructions on how to submit the report, and these will be posted on the grantee resource page for Farm to School, and there will probably be other information coming as far as this specific webinar is concerned so that you know where to find it. And we can get next. And that's it. Unless you guys have any questions specifically, I will go ahead and turn this over at this time, the presentation over to Travis. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. And at this time, we will take questions. We have about 13 minutes left on the scheduled time. If we reach to 2:30 and we're still answering questions and you need to leave, then feel free to go, but note that we will have the Q&A included on the recording that we sent out. So Robert, I've got the chat open, and then if there were some specific questions, then I can answer those now.
Let's go through them one at a time. So, Travis, is the baseline report the same as the quarterly report?
The baseline report is not the same as the quarterly report. The baseline report has requests much more data than the quarterly report, and the baseline report is only completed one time. The quarterly report is completed at different points throughout the project. They will arrive in the same document. They will be combined in the one that grantees receive on October 1st, but for future programmatic semi-annual reports, those will be due as standalone, and there's a much smaller set of questions, and they ask more broadly about what has been your experience with the project in the previous 6 months.
Okay. So how should grantees treat activities that were happening prior to the start of the grant but are not currently ongoing?
There is an opportunity in the baseline report to report on what activities are currently in place, but the information about what happened before your grant began is not necessary for USDA. For the progress report, you'll only have to report the activities that have happened in the course of your grant project.
Okay. When will the FY19 reporting timelines be available on the grantee resources page?
That is an excellent question. We are working on that, and it takes a little bit of time for resources to process through USDA before they can actually be published on the website and available for anyone to click on. I unfortunately don't have an exact timeline, but once those resources are available, we can send out a follow-up email, and you are encouraged to check back on that page frequently to see if any new resources have been posted.
How should statewide projects be approached for a baseline report? Gathering 800 or more SFA's information in a state can be overwhelming.
Absolutely, yes. This is an excellent question. It's related somewhat to a point I brought up earlier in the presentation. you can, if you're doing a statewide project, you can report information from a selection of schools in your baseline report, as long as you report on those same schools in your final report. And I mentioned that the final report will require that you report on the same schools as your baseline report. If you're a statewide grantee and you're selecting certain schools that you're going to use data from, then make sure that you document those schools and that you're able to report on the same schools when you submit your final report.
So you have to be consistent in reporting in the baseline and the closeout using the same schools.
Yes.
Okay. For grant activities, are grantees expected to have begun grant activities prior to their first receipt of funds for the grant?
Since you're asking about funds for the grant, since this has a financial component to it, I'm going to ask Carla to weigh in on this about grant activities prior to having received funds. Carla, do you have any input?
Yeah, so basically, and I'm not really sure where the question is coming from, but you are allowed to charge them. You obviously won't have the funds at that point, but that's why we were saying that on the form itself, as I was doing the training, you still report on expenses under that quarter, and then you draw down accordingly whenever you go and draw down, because everybody's kind of on a different cycle of drawing down from ASAP either way. So I'm not sure if that's what you're asking, but first of all, as far as reporting requirements, yes, you would still report on it, and then second, you also would certainly be able to do that if it's within the period of performance of the grant, meaning as long as the activity occurred from the start on your FNS 529 document, that is an allowable drawdown for your grant, and I'm not sure if that's what they're asking, but that's kind of my answer as far as actual costs that you're allowed to charge.
Next question, Travis, regarding progress of the reporting timelines and deadlines. The second progress report should cover October through March. Will there be a third progress report for April through June, or is April through June to be included in the final report submitted by the grantees?
Okay, so first of all, you're exactly right that the second progress report will cover October through March. If your project ends on an even-numbered quarter when a progress report is due, then you are required to submit a progress report at that time. But if your grant term ends in June, at the end of June, then you would not be required to submit a progress report. And I will confirm that and make sure that that information is absolutely correct before that time rolls around. But my understanding is that only the final report will be required if your project ends and a progress report is not also due. So that may sound confusing, but probably the easiest way to think about it is if your project ends Q2 or Q4, then both a final and progress report will be due. If your project ends at the end of Q1 or Q3, then you will only have to submit a final report.
Next question, and this might be a Carla question. The grant award amount from USDA, is the grant award amount equal to the amount paid by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or does this reflect the entire amount, including the match from the grantee?
Okay, so two things. You guys are a very special grant. You have a match requirement. So as far as the federal funds that you will receive, you're only going to receive the federal funds that you applied for in terms of your budgets and what you had on there. And if you look at the 529, we have certain amounts on there, and it specifies specifically your federal award amount. And the technical terms are very interesting, but we use those a lot more internally so that our financial people understand what they're entering and awarding through ASAP. but also to capture that you all have a match. So you're going to see an amount that just reflects the federal amount that is in ASAP, which is what's actually going to be in your account. But you're also going to see a total amount that's going to show the federal funds that you were awarded and then the addition of the match. Obviously, this is not monetary money that we're giving you, but we are capturing that information on the 529 because we are required to do that. So when you see those amounts, understand they're different. One of them is just, obviously, your budget will align with that. That is the federal award amount, and the other is the total cumulative amount of the federal amount that you stated in the application you would meet added to your federal award amount. So hopefully that makes sense. So it's a total of both, and the reason I'm specifying that is on the 529 you're going to see both amounts. You'll see the federal amount and the federal amount plus the match in a different section. So when you see that, don't think, oh, I'm getting more money. No, that's just the total of the match and the federal funds. So, and I think you'll be able to figure that out because they're usually 20. We have 25% match, so that other amount is significantly higher. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
When should grantees have access to ASAP?
So grantees hopefully at this point have already attended the ASAP webinar. First of all, we had encouraged everyone to do that. That's good because I feel like this batch of grantees has done a really good job of attending one or the other. If you have not, I would highly recommend that. And I'm throwing that out there because for starters, that's going to help the other process go a lot faster. Once you have done that, I know I've talked to a couple. I have had at least 3 confirm that they are getting emails from ASAP this week, which sounds promising, depending on where you fell in terms of the batch. Anna had a pretty significant number for her grantees. We have 3 types of grants at this point, the support service planning and training. And so our accountants are working through those to set you guys up. I did have one person reach out to me this week that missed the email. I guess they didn't see it, and when they inquired, our accountant confirmed that they had sent that last week. So keep an eye on that. If you are the ASAP point of contact and you sent that form to us already, I think I have all of mine, so I can say that those have already been sent to our accountants. So depending on where you are at with the process, it's hard for me to say when you're going to get it. If you've already turned in your ASAP form, that's you're ahead of the game. And if you've received that email, then the next step would be for you to link the account and set up your financial point of contacts in the system. So depending on where you're at in that timeline, whether you've received that email, then you pretty much have it already. And if you haven't gotten there, then you've got to wait till you get that email. But it kind of varies. I am hearing some promising stuff that people have already been getting that. So if you have a question specifically of I haven't seen my funds or I didn't get an email, you can send an email to your grant officer. Like I said, I've seen a few come through, and hopefully we'll have an updated list before the conference. So if from here to then you haven't heard, Anna will be at the conference, and I will not be there, but you can send us an email and say, I still haven't heard and I haven't seen an email. Keep in mind, again, that email will go to your ASAP point of contact. So whoever is listed on there is the person that needs to be looking out for that email. Thank you.
Okay, we are almost at time. We have another question, though. Since the farm-to-school census is currently underway and much of the information in it is also requested on the baseline report or is very similar, if we're a statewide project, can we get data that our state schools submit for the census to include in our baseline report? Oddly enough, I'm able to answer that myself. The answer to that question is no. The census data collection will be concluding well past the deadline for the baseline report, and we will not be, even USTA will not be getting any sort of insight into that information until later on, closer to winter of 2020. The good news is that if your SFAs are already working to pull this information together for the farm-to-school census, it will make completing the baseline report that much easier, and vice versa. Travis, it is 2:30.
All right, Robert, I think I've got a handle on the chat now, so if you need to get off the webinar, then feel free to go ahead. I think I can take over from here, but I want to address the last few questions as people who watch the recording may have similar questions. So I'll continue, but Robert, if you need to go, or participants, if any of you need to leave, as it is 2:30, we want to respect your time. So feel free to leave the presentation if you need to, and we'll be able to you'll be able to catch up once you receive the presentation recording. So with once we've answered each question, the webinar will conclude, and then everyone will be dismissed. But I'll go through a couple of other questions we got. We received a question, does everyone have a different start and end date for their grant? Carla can help me answer this.
So we tried to keep them to some degree the same, but what happens is by just because of the nature of these particular projects, we have 1- and 2-year projects, so that alone is going to differentiate your projects already. So for the most part, if you're planning, you're going to have, depending on that time frame, either the 1 or 2 year, and I think the support services are 2 years, so if you can chime in as far as that, but that part should be consistent. I think some people might have had some odd ones where they did like a 1.5 years, but if you were within that 2-year threshold, we went ahead and gave you that. But for the most part, we tried to keep them. The start date should be the same, and then they do always end on a quarter. So to answer your question, no, not really. But if you're a type of grant and you came in for 2 years, then yes, you'll be within that same 2 years. If you're a 1-year grant, then you'll be within that 1 year. It's kind of those odd ones that did like a 1.5 years or something like that. That was different. There might be a few, but I think everybody pretty much asked for the entire time if it was a 2-year project or a 1-year project. So yes, they should be pretty consistent.
Okay, and then yeah. I'll address another question in the queue, and then Carla, there are several questions for you. So I can take this first one, which asks, can you clarify why we select Q4 even though we submit the report for the end of October? Isn't Q4 for October, November, December? So the quarters relate to the federal fiscal quarter. The federal fiscal year begins October 1st and then ends September 30th of the following year. It does not align with the calendar year. So for the federal fiscal calendar, Q4 is July, August, September. So that is why you would select Q4. Carla, do you have anything to add, or did I get it?
No, I think you did a really good job. So yeah, that explains it. I wanted to reiterate that a lot because that is going to throw off your reporting and FIPPers. That is where that element becomes super important. I think it's the only place where you will actually have to identify Q4 outside of anything else you'll be using. So this comes into play. If you're the FIPPers reporting person, you probably need to make sure you have that breakout if you're not familiar with the federal quarters. But as Travis stated, it's Q4. So that first report, I just want to emphasize that it's Q4 2019. That's the first report you guys will be pulling in the system if you're the reporting person. So thank you.
And then, Carla, these questions are both related. They're related to ASAP, it seems. We're asked, are drawdowns meant to be reimbursements, or can we also draw down in advance? And another participant asked, should we be drawing down money yet?
So, a couple questions here. So as far as ASAP is concerned, you really should be invoiced for those. You shouldn't be drawn in advance because you get into a lot of technicalities in terms of incurring, gaining interest, and then you have to report a special report. So we don't encourage that. You really should be drawing down once you've had the invoices. But if you have specific questions in a unique situation, you can email us. But for the most part, it should be after, once you've got the bills. What was the other question, Travis? I feel like I'm missing one.
Should grantees be drawing money down at this time?
Yeah, so at this time, if you have access, that's awesome, first of all. The other thing I was going to say is, if you're going to the conference and you're like, yeah, I'm incurring expenses, so yeah, if you have an expense, you can draw it down. Obviously, if ASAP is not open to you, you're not going to be able to do it right now. But yes, as long as you have the expense that you incurred during that quarter, you should be fine. We're just not saying go in and draw down the whole thing. You should be doing disbursements as your quarters come along. And the other thing is, some folks already have an established timeline of when they draw down, and so you want to keep it consistent to whatever that would be. All right, and thanks.
And Carla, we had another question following up on the one you answered before, when you mentioned invoices. What did you mean by invoices with regards to ASAP?
Yeah, so depending on how your project is established, this might be more applicable to states that have contractors and subcontractors. They might actually get a bill or something from the subgrantee, so maybe not so applicable. So that would be an official, total amount for that subgrantee, kind of showing them what they need to go ahead and pay out. That probably isn't applicable because these are smaller grants. So basically, I think the best way for me to say it is, whenever you guys have incurred that expense, you can go in and draw down, if that makes sense.
Okay. There were some questions that weren't marked with the hashtag in front. So let me go back and grab a couple of those now. The first of which is, we're working at 9 schools in 4 different districts. Should we collect the baseline information, such as % of meals from scratch for each district, and average them? This is a good question. It's a really technical question. I'm going to request that you follow up via the Farm to School inbox, farmtoschool@usda.gov. But also, once that baseline report template has been sent out, take a look at that and look at exactly how the question is worded, and that should hopefully provide a little bit of guidance if you haven't seen that yet. Let's see, we're running out of questions, which I hope means that everyone feels very confident in the content of this presentation. Here's one I can answer. We submit the financial report on FIPPers. What system is used to submit the baseline progress reports? So baseline, progress, and final reports are distributed via email using a system called Qualtrics. Some people may have some experience with it, but the reports themselves are they're forms that have selections or entry fields, and you navigate through them sequentially. They do not look exactly the same as the templates that are online, because those are just Word documents. The ones that you'll actually receive have some logic to them and flow a certain way, which can vary depending on how you answer or respond to the questions. But Qualtrics is the system. It's not the same as FIPPers, and that's part of why it works differently. Whereas in FIPPers, you go in and complete your report with the programmatic reports. You'll receive an invitation, and you'll complete it that way. And Carla, this is a question that you could probably answer better than I can. We have multiple partners contributing cost share. How is cost share verified?
So we are not verifying it on our end at this point. The only thing we are collecting, if you all remember the screenshot, which I realize was just subtle, but it's just that information where you have to enter the amount to date that you have collected, if it's monetary or if it's volunteer hours, or however you're meeting your match. So we are not specifically, as USDA, we are not collecting information specific as a breakout. You should definitely collect that on your end, that said, because you are required to do that as a grantee. So you should probably be collecting, depending on what kind of share they're giving you. I don't know if it's time or if it's a monetary amount. You probably want to keep your invoices and that on file. But we are not collecting it on our end. It's just something you're required to do as a grantee. So If you have more specific questions, like what kind of things should I keep, if you want to send a specific question to your grant officer, that probably would be your best bet. But again, we're not collecting that. You are required to keep that on your end, though. You know, we used to have to collect like time and attendance for staff that were contributing time to a grant. If that is how you're meeting your amount, and in their case, you should probably just ask them to do a breakout and summary for you. But there's a couple methods and a couple ways that are acceptable that you can do to collect that information. But we at FNS are not collecting that in the food program reporting system. It's just the section requiring the specific total match that you have met specifically for that quarter and cumulatively as the grant goes along. The other thing I wanted to emphasize, and maybe I'm kind of getting off track, is just keep in mind that the financial report is not on the same timeline as the progress report. So one is quarterly and one is semi-annually, so don't let that confuse you. You'll see different, you know, the email from Qualtrics coming in at a different time, and there will be reminders for the PRIPPers reporting once you get set up. That person will get email reminders as well. Well, depending on if we set that up. But if not, yeah, that is due quarterly versus, so you'd be reporting on the financial aspect of the match quarterly, so you just need to make sure that you're keeping track of that and you're ready to report on that on a quarterly basis. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for adding that level of detail, Carla, that there are two different reporting timelines. I think that's important to remember. And then we were also asked who will receive a copy of this webinar. The same group that received the initial invitation will receive the link to the recording and the slides. The reporting list included project coordinators, progress reporting contacts, and financial reporting contacts. If you happen to know that one of your contacts did not receive this email, it's possible that there may have been an error in the way that their information was entered. And so it might have bounced back, or perhaps the contact has changed since you first reported who your points of contact are. So the notice didn't go through to your current point of contact for reporting or project coordination. But that's the list of people who will receive the follow-up email. And then if you have not received a copy, or if you have not received a link to the recording by the time the grantee gathering is over next Friday, please follow up with us. I very much hope to have the webinar link shared by then, but if in case there's any sort of delay, then you are welcome to follow up with us if you think you should have received it by the end of next Friday. And then we were also asked whether the standalone report will be reported also using Qualtrics. I'm guessing this means will the progress report that's not a baseline report or final report, will the semi-annual progress report be distributed using Qualtrics? Yes. All program reports will be distributed using email invitations, and you'll receive a link that is unique to your organization. And once you've completed all the questions, you'll have an opportunity to click submit, and then that will be how your progress report is submitted. That is true for baseline, semi-annual, and final reports. And then we were asked, who do we need to email if a contact has changed, or if you need to change contact information, or if someone has left the organization. The best way to communicate that change is to email farmtoschool@usda.gov along with your regional lead and your grants officer. And then it may not necessarily directly affect what each of those agency contacts do, but it's an important process for making sure that everybody is informed in case it does touch on their portion of the grant management. All right, and I believe that brings us to the end of the questions. If you had a specific question or a technical question, or if we didn't get to your question during this time, if it were somehow missed, then you are welcome to follow up via farmtoschool@usda.gov, or with your grant officer. If you're planning or training grant, then Carla is your grant officer. If you're an implementation grant, then Anna Aerosmith is your grant officer, or with your regional lead. All of us are available to answer questions or help if you encounter any issues with any of these reporting systems. So with all that being said, I am going to once again thank everybody for coming and taking time out of their day to sit in on this presentation. I hope that it was informative, and we look forward, if you're implementation and planning grantee and you'll be in New Orleans next week, we very much look forward to meeting you there. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. So I will stop the recording and end the meeting. Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.